Hey everyone, with the album coming out next Friday and an early stream planned on Monday, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of the bands that really inspired the creation of this album. But before I dive into the three bands I want to highlight today, I just want to point out I'm wearing a Kilpréz shirt. My shirt samples came in and they are looking hella nice. So if you haven't grabbed yourself a shirt, definitely check them out on Bandcamp. I've got several different colors and designs, so check it out, get some, and with that part of the shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's dive into the next part of the shameless self-promotion and actually, I guess, promote some other bands by talking about myself. The first band I want to talk about is actually Between the Buried and Me. Now, this band may be on your newsfeed today because they released a new album today, which I'm really excited to dive into, but I want to go all the way back to about 2004 and a song called Mordecai off of their sophomore album, The Silent Circus. Now, when I first heard this song, it was probably the most dynamically different in terms of heaviness and softness in a song I'd ever heard. From the blistering technicality and screams and riffage of the first half of the song into the very melodic build-up of the second half, and now my more metal-inclined friends at the time kind of struggled with they called it the emo parts of the song, but a lot of them were won over by the next album, Alaska, but especially Colors. And still, to me, I wanted to highlight The Silent Circus because it was the first album I heard by Between the Buried and Me, and it kind of got me bought into this idea of this adventurous group of guys just creating whatever they wanted. There wasn't really a blueprint for what they were doing. It was something new, and every time they release an album, there's something a little bit unexpected about it. And I've said in a lot of the PR stuff that I've sent out around this album that Kilpréz was born out of a love for bands that are hard to pin down yet have a really clear identity, and that really goes for all three bands I want to talk about today. And yes, I'm only going to talk about three bands, because I could sit here for hours talking about different bands that have inspired me as a musician throughout the years, but I don't want to sit here for hours. You probably don't want to listen to this for hours, so let's move on to the next one of the three, which is Sikth. Now, Sikth is an English prog metal, mathcore, proto-gent. You can call them what you want. I call them brilliant. I got into them when I was probably 15, 16, and they were one of the first bands I got into that had two lead vocalists, and I'd really say that some of Mikey Goodman's approaches to his vocals and to the delivery of them was probably a stepping stone from bands like System of a Down and some of the Mike Patton stuff to embrace weirder and weirder vocals in heavier and heavier music. But even though that definitely inspired me to look at different ways to approach vocals, I'd say the biggest thing I took from Sikth was this idea of embracing technicality and complexity, but for the good of the song, and always thinking about the songwriting and the flow and not about extended instrumental parts necessarily. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was really impressed with how many incredibly complicated parts there were to Sikth's music that were still topped off with really either melodic and catchy vocals or rhythmically catchy vocals, something that was something that would have definitely been an instrumental part for a lot of other bands. And it really got me interested in this challenge of taking on writing complicated and intricate shit and really just adding on top, and probably overdid it at points in the past, but really trying to find that balance. And speaking of that two vocalist setup, though, the third band that I always include in my sort of FFO, or for fans of, when talking about my band, is the number 12 Looks Like You. Now, that was probably the first band I remember getting into with two lead vocalists, and I got into them on their first EP, and through subsequent albums followed them through an incredibly exciting evolution, which again always bore their sort of identity or their mark, but at the same time it always was a little bit different. You can listen through there and the first album is kind of grindy, second album is kind of screamo-y, third album is like laying down the gauntlet for future mathcore bands. fourth album has more elements of almost prog metal, and then Wild Gods came out, years later and absolutely blew me away with just truly going above and beyond anything I thought a comeback album could be. So number 12, on top of the two vocalist approach, really wowed me every time, because I'd listen to them and I'd feel like everyone got into the headspace of writing whatever was right for that song and not coming in and saying, now we're going to write this sort of album. I think it was just the headspace they were in. And that was the type of band that I always wanted to be in the past, but I always seemed to start playing with people and they'd go, we want to sound like Lamb of God, or we want to sound like In Flames, whereas I was kind of like, let's see what happens, which I know is a bigger challenge, but it's one that I've embraced then on my own now and will embrace moving forward on the next Kilpréz album, on any of my other upcoming projects, and it's an approach that I love because it frees you to express yourself in the manner that you want. So those are the three bands that I wanted to highlight for sort of the inspiration for this album. I'm also going to make a Spotify playlist that highlights some of my favorite songs by these artists, as well as a handful of other artists that inspired me, but again, didn't want to make the video too long. I've already been speaking for way longer than I meant to, but I'm inspired to by those three bands, so check them out. Check out the full album on Monday. Grab a shirt. Shameless self-promotion over. Have a nice weekend.